So guys, it was only last year that I made a comparison review of Hell Let Loose and Scriptum, and to be honest, I actually didn't think I'd be coming back to this topic so soon. But the reality is, both of these games have changed so much since then, and so the question is, have my conclusions changed as well? Well guys, this is BillyEatWorld again, and let's find out. Alright guys, how you going? Welcome to the video, and like I said, today we're going to be putting Hell Let Loose and Scriptum head to head again. But just before we do get into that, I just want to give a quick shameless plug to my Twitch channel, which to be honest, I haven't really cared about until now. Some of you guys might have noticed that I've been trying to live stream on YouTube a bit more frequently in the last few weeks, and I've actually started to multi-stream on Twitch as well. But ideally, someday in the future, I would like to try and migrate my streams entirely over to Twitch if I can. So please, if you do have a sec and you're interested in that sort of thing, please check out the links below, head over and follow me. That'd be much appreciated. But anyway, with that out of the way, for those of you who haven't played either of these games before, well, we probably should start with what Scriptum and Hell Let Loose have in common. And well, first up, as you can see, they're both large-scale World War II themed hardcore indie shooters that put a big emphasis on things like realism and immersion. Now, when I say large scale, I mean really large scale. Scriptum has an 80-player cap, and Hell Let Loose has a 100-player cap. And both feature massive maps based on real-world historical locations, where you can fight it out on the ground as a soldier or in a range of different armored ground vehicles. Now, another important thing I should mention is that both of these games are heavily team-based, and they both have a class loadout system. And that's really where we start to see the first major differences, because as similar as they might seem on the surface, both of these games seem to prioritize different aspects of the experience. Like I said, both games are trying to be realistic and immersive, but Scriptum makes that a priority above all else, whereas Hell Let Loose makes exceptions for the sake of gameplay. And we'll get into that in a bit more detail in just a sec, but the easiest way to explain it is that Scriptum is probably closer to being a military simulator rather than just a typical shooter game. Now, a year ago in the last video, I probably would have said the same thing, but like I said, both of these games have changed so much since then, especially when it comes to this point, because you can tell the Hell Let Loose devs are adding features that make the game more accessible to a wider, more casual audience. Most importantly, since the last video, they've added in basic spotting mechanics, tactical pings, and an expanded marker system, all features that are aimed at helping players communicate visually. Which means that it's a lot easier to lone wolf in Hell Let Loose now. You don't necessarily need to be talking and sticking with your squad members the whole time. And look, I know a lot of people will make the argument that communication and teamwork are what these games are all about. And sure, that's completely right to a certain extent. But the reality is, if you're someone that's new to the tactical shooter genre, you either might not understand how important teamwork is, or you just might not like that style of gameplay altogether. And so the point I'm trying to make here is that while Scriptum and its community still actively discourages that kind of player, Hell Let Loose are making it easier for them to coexist with the regular community. So that's probably an important thing to think about if you want to get into either of these games. What kind of player are you? Maybe that's going to determine which one of these games you'll decide to play and which one you might pass on. More than that though, what you'll notice about Scriptum is not only doesn't it have features that hold your hand, the structure of the loadout system is a lot stricter as well. For example, unlike in Hell Let Loose, you're stuck with using whatever authentic weapons and gear is appropriate to that class, which very often will be just a standard bolt-action rifle. Not just that, but certain classes have important gadgets that can destroy enemy spawns or support your own, and you'll realize that those classes are critical to the success of your team. And as a result, in Scriptum, if you don't know how to use those classes properly, or if you don't follow the orders of your squad leader, you might either get yelled at by the other members of your squad, or you might get kicked out of your squad altogether. And that brings me to another really important point, which is that whereas Scriptum kind of forces you into that carefully curated World War II experience, Hell Let Loose is a lot more flexible. And loadouts aren't the only example of this. Also, since the last video, visual customization has been added to Hell Let Loose, and that obviously makes things a little bit more unauthentic. Now, if you're even a little bit familiar with PostScriptum, well, you'd know that visual customization of any type, even if it is kind of authentic, probably isn't something we're ever going to see in this game. And not just that, but the community probably wouldn't accept it even if they did add it, because chances are if you're someone who plays PostScriptum, you're not after flexibility, you're after that curated, authentic experience. Now, moving on, speaking of the kind of people who play these games, we probably should take a look at player counts, because that's something that's changed a lot in the last year as well. And I think the most important point to make here is that although both games have grown since the last video, they haven't grown to the same extent. For example, PostScriptum is doing better, but it hasn't actually grown that much since the last video. It's only up to about an average of 600 daily players. Whereas, on the other hand, Hell Let Loose is the big winner here. It's more than doubled its average daily player count, up to around 2,600 to 2,800 players. That's a big jump. Now, it's not uncommon for cult indie shooters, especially those in early access, to grow over a period of time, but it is uncommon for games like this to grow as fast as Hell Let Loose has. And obviously, we're not talking Fortnite levels of growth here, but when you compare it to, for example, other popular tactical shooters like Squad, well, it's reached the same number of players after only 1 year that Squad reached after 3 years. And at the end of the day, for the reasons I mentioned before, it's mostly the fact that Hell Let Loose is just more accessible to a wider audience. And as a result, it's not just growing from players already in the tactical shooter community, but from new players as well, maybe moving over from games like Battlefield 5. Now, it's not just being accessible that's causing this growth. Another factor I spoke about a fair bit in the last video was how Hell Let Loose seems to be a bit more consistent when it comes to updates. But most importantly, PostScriptum back then, even though it probably had more content to begin with, was actually starting to stagnate a little from a lack of new content. Thankfully, since then, PostScriptum has not only got a second chapter, which took us to the fall of France in 1940, but we also recently got Chapter 3, which focuses on the Normandy campaign. And to go along with that, it also had a couple of much-needed free weekends as well, which I really think went a long way to boosting the player base and ultimately towards saving the game. Now, on the other hand though, rather than flashy chapter-based updates, Hell Let Loose has always stuck to a schedule of smaller but more regular content drops. Although I've got to say that the marketing team definitely seemed to push the last one, Update 7, a little bit more than it usually does, with stuff like teaser trailers and that sort of thing. Maybe we will see some sort of big chapter update in the future. But most importantly, the big thing to note is that when I made the last video, Hell Let Loose didn't have a lot of maps, and a lot of the key systems just weren't finished or needed improvements. And since then, things like animations and sound and ballistics have all been overhauled. There's been new vehicles and maps added, old maps retouched, and all of those details have made it a little bit closer to where PostScriptum was when we did make that last video. So just to recap, what we've learned so far is that both of these games are pretty similar, both are still growing, and both are getting new content. And now that Hell Let Loose has had most of its core systems overhauled, it's getting harder to say that either game looks or sounds better than the other. They've both got their strengths and weaknesses. Not just that, but now that both games have got a few more players as well, you can actually find active servers around the world, even in smaller regions like, for example, Australia. So like I said, really the main differences now are the gameplay style and the community differences we mentioned before. Basically, are you a die-hard tactical shooter fan, or are you maybe after a more casual experience? Maybe you've come from, for example, a game like Battlefield 5. Either way though, I do reckon if you're a fan of World War II shooters, you will get something out of both of these games, even if you do prefer one or the other. For example, in my case, I probably do have 3 times more hours on Hell Let Loose, but I still have racked up a fair few on PostScriptum, so obviously that means that I get something out of both. So what I'd recommend you do if you're interested in one or either of these games is either buy both, or if you're short on cash, wait around for the next free weekend for each one and give them a try. Because hopefully what you can see from this video is that the answer to Hell Let Loose versus Postscriptum isn't really that clear anymore. You really need to jump in and make up your own mind. But anyway, guys, that just about wraps up this quick review. So as always, please let me know what you think in the comment section down below. And don't forget, if you do want to keep up to date with my live streams, please, please, please head over and follow my Twitch channel. I'll leave all the links down below. As always, though, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and please feel free to check out the links in the description if you want to see any more of these videos. And also, don't forget you can find my Twitter and Discord links down there as well if you want to keep in touch. And as always, until next time, see you later, and have a good one.